Good evening, City of Beaverton residents, employees, and partners. My name is Matthew Halderman, and I manage the Human Resources Talent Acquisition team. I'm also the moderator for tonight's Meet the City Manager Finalists Community Forum. This meeting is being recorded, and for members of our audience who prefer to receive this broadcast in Spanish, please click the interpretation button or language interpretation button on your webinar controls. It may be a few moments as we're waiting for our interpreter. If you wish to only hear the interpreted language, click the mute original audio when the selection is available. Now, over the next 90 minutes, you will have an opportunity to hear from our two finalists, Jen Haruyama and Eric Zimmerman, ask questions and provide your own feedback. As you may know, last December, the city hired Dr. Kurt Wilson as our interim city manager to oversee the city's transition from its new form of government under the new, or to its new form of government under the new city charter. His term is expected to conclude on June 30th, at which point, hopefully, one of tonight's finalists will take over as the city's full-time city manager. Tonight, finalists will each have 5 minutes to introduce themselves and share what about our community resonates with them, as in, why Beaverton? And then the next 35 minutes will be spent answering questions submitted by the audience. Now, the city has received many questions from the community members already, and we will get through as many as we can and take questions submitted using the Q&A button if time allows. Links to the community feedback surveys in English and in Spanish will be provided in the chat box shortly, and the surveys will remain open until 9:00 a.m. Pacific time tomorrow, May 14th, 2021. Now, joining us first this evening is Jen Haruyama. Jen, are you with us?
I am.
Jen, welcome to the program, and thank you for joining us. Please introduce yourself to the audience and share with them what about the city of Beaverton resonates with you. Why are you interested in Beaverton?
Fantastic. Well, thank you, Matthew. Well, welcome and thank you for having me. My name's Jen Haruyama. I've been in 5 years working as city manager for 2 different cities in California. And I'm currently the city manager of Tracy, which is one of the fastest growing communities adjacent to the Bay Area in California. And I've also worked for one of the most diverse cities in the Central Valley, which is Tracy as well. But just in a nutshell, my 25-year experience includes working for 8 different cities, from populations as small as 12,000 to as big as 100,000. So I've kind of done the gamut. And I've also overseen a number of departments, ranging from being a finance director to an HR director to an IT director and an economic development and budget officer. And so that kind of leads me to answering the question that's probably on your mind is why Beaverton? And a couple of reasons that kind of hit close to home. One, I used to live in the Pacific Northwest years ago, specifically Seattle, and actually do have a lot of family and friends in the Portland area and actually in the Vancouver area as well. And so one of the things we've always wanted to do is get back to the Pacific Northwest when both my husband and I reached retirement age. But Beaverton specifically is really unique for a number of reasons. And really, and it's not cliche, but it really has a lot to do with the values of diversity, and which is really important to me, coming from a family where my spouse is Japanese, lived in another country most of his life, coming to the United States, and my children are biracial and also identifies LGBTQ, and making sure that they're transitioning to an environment that will support them is important. And it also helps that I have a little bit of intel that my best friend's parents lived in Beaverton for 20 years. So I got a little bit of the inside scoop. And I think it's really important that your city manager has value alignment with what the city stands for. And I think you have all those things going for you. Great, robust economic development, really identifying ways to kind of set yourself apart from Portland because you are so unique and different from that. And of course, just the good food. I mean, if anything, it's the good food, right? And I got to experience that today and yesterday as well. So with that, I think that concludes my overview, and I'll turn it back to you, Matthew.
All right, Jen, thanks for a great introduction. Like I said, we got a lot of questions to get through, just like with our other forum yesterday. And so we're just going to jump right in, if that's okay.
Sounds great.
All right, perfect. So you will be administering policy for a city of almost 100,000 people. I think we're right on the cusp of 100,000. But you have not been elected to represent any of those people. How will you observe, solicit, and/or incorporate the needs or wishes of the voters?
You know what, that's a really great question. So just real brief framework, as you know, that the council, under the council manager form of government, hires and fires probably two people. That would be the city manager and the attorney. And so when the majority of the council decides to go left, that's the direction that the city manager does in terms of implementation. However, I also represent the community. And so one of the ways that I get a pulse of the community is really being out there with boots on the ground. Not only living in the community, which would be a priority to me, but also, having meaningful relationships, shopping, meeting our business community, having open forums with residents, and having a non-political perspective, and bringing that to the policy table so that I can share that with the council. Because your city manager, while not political, is responsible for really having a good sense of the community and the direction in which the community wants to go, and is obligated to share that information with the council in a very objective way.
All right, thank you, Jen. Now, also in your introduction, you kind of mentioned a little bit about how great Beaverton is as a place to live and a place to work and as a place to eat with all the good food. So that being said, Beaverton has a really family-friendly reputation. What would you do to continue to attract families to want to live in Beaverton?
I think that's really important. A lot of that too has to do with really good cooperation with some of our local special districts, particularly, our Parks District and our Fire, and really wanting to emphasize some of those, because that also has to attribute to our property values, including our school system. So intense relationships and partnerships with some of those other agencies are going to be really important. But we also want to attract jobs that are applicable for those families, using transit and transit-oriented development, which the city is already doing next to the MAX, which is really important, and using that transportation so that you can spend time and quality time with your family rather than on the road, maybe commuting to Portland. The other is listening to what those families need in terms of services. And again, that goes back to those partnerships with the parks, but also making sure that your neighborhood shopping centers reflect those services that reflect your population and your population's need. So doing a lot of community surveying and outreach, and really listening from an economic development perspective of what those expectations are, and then delivering on those.
All right, well, thank you. And I know, that's a really great explanation of the family-friendly environment that Beaverton really espouses. And one of the other aspects of family-friendliness is safety. So where does community safety rank in your list of priorities?
Well, obviously, safety is going to be at the top, whether it's working with our fire or our immediate police department here. And a lot of that has more to do with developing and cultivating those relationships with the community, and making sure our community outreach and our partnerships reflect the community by holding those in multiple languages, so that we can make sure that we're getting all of representation. But also, it has to be funded, and it has to be supported, and making sure that those services are actually what the community desires. So it would be an absolute yes, Matthew.
All right. Along the topic of safety, the Beaverton Human Rights Advisory Commission has spent much of the last year working with Beaverton Police Department to understand what is possible and achievable to improve police interactions with people they encounter in Beaverton. Now, what is your experience with public safety policy development, and how would you facilitate establishing a public oversight commission?
Oh, wow, that's a great question. So one of the things that we have done in the City of Tracy is, of course, we're kind of meeting people where they're at. And we've done a number of community forums to really connect with the community. But one of the most impactful things that we do is we have what's called a police advisory board. And that is actually made up of members of the community throughout the organization, extremely diverse. And it's literally a sounding board that the police chief uses when policies are being developed. And so that we can get basically a community perspective on that. So it's not quite a commission, but it's a really great tool to be able to get a very, very solid perspective of just someone that is just, in the community, not necessarily always engaged in government, but has a really good optic in terms of what their neighbor might be thinking if they're reading a policy. The other is doing a comprehensive review of all of our use of force policies. We did that when we benched it against the 8 Can't Wait campaign through Campaign Zero. We actually came out to have a B+, which is the highest actually that you can get in the state of California. And so we're really proud of that. We did eliminate, of course, the cardiac hold like everyone did. And we're continuing to refine those policies through this kind of advisory board that I'm sharing with you as well. And then the other really is some of the work that we're starting in terms of developing an equity impact tool to be able to work and operationalize some of the important goals that are around public safety and the relationship with the community, and making sure that we're meeting some of our diversity, equity, and inclusionary targets.
All right. Great, thanks, Jen. Now I do have some diversity, equity, and inclusion questions coming up here in a little bit, but before I move on to that, I want to just bring up the question, how would you cultivate a healthy working relationship between you, the mayor, and the staff under the new charter?
That's a great question. And I think the first thing, it really goes down to just developing that level of trust and really understanding what the issue is before you. Moving from a strong mayor to a council manager form of government is very, very fluid. And it's also in a very gray area where the council and the body has to make sure that they are understanding what their role is and what lane they're in and what lane the city manager is. And that's really a collective dialogue with respect to developing a governance plan. And the mayor and I have to have a conversation about how that shifts and how we can work together, where we can find specific purposes and goals for the mayor that actually are in alignment with what the council wants, because ultimately the council body is going to make those decisions of what really the mayor is going to be able to focus on. And the mayor will have to be able to do that focus within a parameter that's set by the council. So my job really is to treat all the individual council members equally, including the mayor, because they are all have an equal vote, and be sure that I'm setting forth the opportunity for them to develop those kind of policies so they can learn how to navigate underneath the new form of government, if you will. And that's really going to be probably a very long process to move through over this next year as we get more clarity on roles.
Very much indeed. So you mentioned, well, the question was about healthy working relationships like within the city, within the staff, but how do we extend that out to the community? As in, there's lots of different voices out there. Some of them are kind of divisive, but so how would you promote unity among the divisive voices that could be out there?
I think when you start moving through this transition process, it has to be a very public process. So as you're moving through it, as you're deciding to make policy adjustments that are going to reflect behavioral changes or roles, you need to take that to the public forum, and the public needs to have a chance to see the information and to weigh in on it. Some great examples for food for thought, since I've done this with another agency, is really developing kind of a code of conduct. It's basically a tool that sets forth what lanes the councils are in, what they can do, what their relationship is with each other, what their relationship is with the community, the city manager, and staff. And it really is a blueprint to kind of move forward. And they also can develop, and these are all public documents that the community can weigh in and put their fingerprints on. They can develop a norms statement, which really kind of affirms their commitment to the council manager form of government. And then finally, they can develop a council protocol policy. And that really is for the council to be able to figure out, how do I get things on the agenda? What is the process, the public process for me as an individual raising that? And there's lots of different process questions that they have. And again, this is another opportunity for the community to weigh in, because they watch this while they're dialoguing during a meeting, on television or through the web. So again, I think it's going to be a very open and public process, and that's where they get to weigh in. The other is to have some community dialogues about what this all is and isn't. And I think a lot of people just kind of backing up really need to have that conversation first and that education before we kind of jump into more of the mechanics of the issue.
Okay, so kind of along similar lines, how would you, or could you describe your experience with equity in the workplace?
Sure. So one of my charges was to implement the City of Tracy's Equity and Empowerment Initiative, and that really focused a lot on police relationships, and then also started working on basically the organization as well. And so the first piece of it, through our protest relationships with protesters, we've actually invited the lead for those groups to participate on community forums, having them be a part of the dialogue and helping actually develop the agenda for the conversation. And so we mirrored a lot of what other cities were doing. We're having those conversations. We also extended them out to our organization as well by inviting leaders from the city of Oakland, for instance, that have formed a social equity departments. We also were fortunate to have the National Organization for Black Law Enforcement attend a number of forums for us and speaking with our senior management and really understanding. And unfortunately, you know, some of those conversations also, although they are public, really had a lot of emotional aspect to them, where there were also groups that weren't quite unified in that perspective and really kind of explained their perspective, which was very tense. And so the community really had to work through some of those issues. Right now, we're working and finishing up all of our, as I mentioned earlier, and I probably am going to repeat myself, we had already discussed putting through all of our comprehensive review and making all of those adjustments to manage the 8 Can't Wait campaign, which we've done successfully. We're now moving forward to implementing more operationalized goals and are getting a consultant to assist us with that. But what I've done in the interim to kind of educate myself is I was the League of California Cities presidential selection for Advancing Equity committee to be able to develop actually tools for cities across California on how to implement this. So I've been able to work with a team of 25 elected officials and administrators throughout the cities and California cities, excuse me, to be able to put together just how to do these equity initiatives from top to bottom, whether you have money or whether you don't, and identify those key speakers and those key type of tools to help them get started.
Well, that kind of brings up my very next question is, how will you ensure an equity lens is used in departmental work and in budgeting for equity?
Yeah, you know, and that really starts, I think it does start from the top. It starts with your council, which I think that process is already underway. Your senior leadership team, which has direct influence over all of your services and your programs, really have to do some exercising. And part of that exercise involves, you know, taking implicit bias tests and finding out where they're at, having a collective and an individual kind of conversation about their lens, their equity lens, and understanding that. But more importantly, the team has to develop a collective equity lens so that when they're working with their managers, when they're working with their employees, that lens is then shared with how they view their service implementation, right? Or their own recommended policy development for council. And part of that is, you know, you have an equity impact tool process that helps you go through all of your services for individual departments and really look through that and see where you're going to kind of target your changes in the way that you do things. A great example would be your comprehensive plan and your update process. An excellent opportunity to really instill some of those DEI values in land use decisions, you know, in climate decisions and sustainability, you name it. So you really have an upcoming opportunity to even go deeper at the policy level that really affects the entire community.
Okay, well, thank you. I guess the next question, we're going to switch gears a little bit, although equity is still a piece of it for sure, is what experience do you have with climate crisis policy and how will you execute on Beaverton's climate plan?
Well, I'll talk to you a little bit about my experience, and I know a little bit enough to be dangerous about Beaverton's. I have read through their climate plan, but specifically, you know, I've been working for the past 3 years on what's called Valley Link, and it's a 42-mile passenger rail process in which I was instrumental in helping to develop a regional rail authority which spans multiple agencies and getting rail extended through what's California is known as their BART system from the cities of Livermore through Tracy, through Stockton and Lathrop area. And so that's been a huge endeavor, and I'll tell you why. And obviously, you know, you think sometimes Portland commutes are tough. Well, try a 4-hour commute for some of our residents to the Bay Area from where we're at in the Central Valley. It's just unsustainable. And then you don't want those cars on the ground either. And so this has been a really kind of important undertaking to me. And we've actually just finished our environmental impact report process, and that's been approved. And now we'll be working through a bill to actually get additional funding for the actual planning process of that. But the other is that I've also been able to bring green industries in order to kind of expose more of our Central Valley to green initiatives. Tesla is actually now coming to Tracy, and they are building an autonomous track to be able to use their equipment and test that out in the valley, which is really good. And then also my last comment I would make is I'm also experienced bringing what are called community choice aggregation organizations, both to 2 different cities that I managed. And that is really, for those of you that aren't familiar with it, it's really an opportunity for cities to procure green energy and to be able to provide energy at rate parity with the existing provider, but you have an opportunity to go completely green at different levels. And so think of it as maybe like a Hyundai and a Honda and a Lexus type of tiering, if you will. And so really proud of those initiatives too. I'd like to bring something like that and those experiences to Beaverton.
Great, thank you. Now, from what you've seen so far, what would you say are Beaverton's biggest challenges and how would you begin to address them? Obviously, that's probably more than we have time for tonight, but how would you begin to address them?
You know, I would think that probably some of the areas that Beaverton needs to start to work on clearly is we've talked a lot about the equity lens and really pushing that and operationalizing that. I think that's not really a challenge, it's more of an opportunity. I do think that Beaverton needs to continue to kind of explore what its identity is as that starts to evolve and to really kind of take the next level on economic development using a lot of restaurant and food strategies to start bringing in people that want to move here, that want to enjoy kind of the family atmosphere. And that would also be an opportunity to distinguish itself from Portland because it's so much more than that. It's so much more than a suburb. And the other is really trying to use our incubator efforts to try to generate some more tech jobs to attract some of those employees here and then get people using the transportation system that we have, and then also the TOD housing. The other biggest thing is affordable housing and really trying to initiate that. I think that Beaverton has done a really good job so far in that area. I've been really acclimated to some of the affordable housing projects that are underway or that are planned. And I would love to be able to identify additional funding. We already have some of the money from the bond measure through the Metro, which is really great, and be able to implement that and attract more nonprofit builders.
Great. Next question, we're switching gears a little bit again, and you may have touched on this yesterday at the employee forum, but tell us a little bit about your experience in municipal court operations and what do you see as the role of the city manager in said court operations?
You know, so in California, the court operations are separate and they're with the county. And so my experience is really limited, but I will tell you what I think my role is. I do think my role is one where it's really important that I try to drive access to justice and make sure that the courts are doing what they can to create an equal footing so that people, regardless of their income, have access to a system that's friendly, that's welcoming, and that's easy to navigate. And that we have opportunities to provide services to people who want to represent themselves. They understand the path forward and that they can do that without fear. And that a lot of people just frankly kind of throw their hands in the air because the system is really daunting. And so really I see my role as being someone to help that be efficient and to be something that people want to be a part of. And so when you go through the process, you feel you can say to yourself, you know, I think that was fair.
Okay, thanks, Jen. One of our other questions we've got from our earlier submissions is, are you familiar with the interim city manager's work thus far? And are you comfortable with the way the Beaverton city government management is organized?
I do know that the interim city manager, and I know the interim city manager has been really strategic in what he has chosen to do and not do. There's some decisions that he'd like to leave for the city manager, which I'm sure would be very much appreciated by whichever candidate is selected. But I do think that there's some opportunity for change. And I think that that's a collective process with the organization and with the council, and obviously with the community, if there's budget implications or operational implications associated with that. With the new kind of transition and structure, you are going to need to reorganize and figure out where people need to go and make sure that they're in the right places. So the answer to that would absolutely be yes. I think everybody's really curious about the how, and that's where you really need to make sure that you're engaging all the stakeholders in the process moving forward.
Okay, well, we're approaching the last question that I've got on my list here, but I think we've got so much extra time at this point, we might be able to open it up for some live Q&A here in just a moment. So before we get to that, the next question is, if you become the city manager of Beaverton, do you plan to live in Beaverton?
Yep.
All right.
Shortest answer ever.
All right.
I will add, Matthew, that for those that are watching, one, it's a great question. I know it's not required, but I will tell you that the last two cities that I've been a city manager of, I have lived in both of those cities. And I do feel it's really important. And I always tell the employees, be very afraid.
All right. With that, I'm going to check and see if we've got any live questions available. My team standing by is also monitoring the Q&A, so let's take a look. All right, we've got one question here that says, right now, the two biggest tech employers ride for free, refusing to be part of the city or paying taxes to support the infrastructure they use. What would you do as a city manager to prevent additional tech companies from seeing that as a precedent? Do you believe making an area attractive to employers includes throwing tax breaks at them?
You know, I think it really depends on the value that that employer brings to the community. Whether there's a financial incentive that can be put and invested back into the community is really important. Jobs also is another opportunity as well, and the type of jobs, the number of jobs. So all of those decisions really kind of come into play when the council makes decisions like that. I would say that, you know, in some cases, tax breaks may be an option, but you really have to look at if it's worth it and what you're getting in exchange for that. As for the annexation issue, you know, that's a real challenge, right? I can't tell you how that came to be. I do find it really curious, but I would want future businesses, if we had a situation like that, to annex into the city. And maybe there's a little bit of a conversation about how to encourage that from the get-go when we do our economic development attraction.
All right. Thank you. Oh, we got another one just came in. All right. What is your experience with downtown economic development, especially regarding emerging downtown districts?
So I've worked with multiple cities with downtown main streets, and they're really fundamentally the core of every city. They are the city's kind of identity, if you will, and they're very important. And I know that we're putting a lot of work here in Beaverton. My experience really more recently has been to able to attract and retain storefronts through our COVID pandemic. Pumping about $1 million into our local business economy, specifically providing fee waivers for conditional use permits that are required for our downtown when they were opening up storefronts in our streets, and we were closing our streets for them, providing CDBG grants to support any kind of facade improvements. We're also looking at developing what are called parklets, and they're more permanent structures where they could continue to have that outdoor seating to facilitate more business. And I don't see necessarily that in certain areas going away, depending on the makeup of your downtown, whether you have more boutiques or more restaurants. I do think that you need to have a really solid relationship with your downtown. They really are the core. It's also fundamentally a great opportunity to have community-wide events. Block parties are things that I've also instituted where you have thousands of people coming. You know, brews and blues type of festivals are really important as well. And so really working with them to establish some type of footwork or pedestrian traffic so that they're constantly able to get some of the benefit of that. And some of your TOD planning that you're doing across the street is exactly part of that strategy.
Great, thank you. All right, let's see. We've got another one just hot off the press. Most of what you've talked about up until now has been about making Beaverton better for people who are in the workforce and their families. What about people with disabilities and senior citizens who are not positively impacted by changes made to enhance family and workforce initiatives?
Oh, I think that's a really good point. So I can tell you that most cities will need to do what's called an ADA transition plan. And I would suspect that Beaverton has been going through that process where there's improvements that need to be made to make sure that all of your facilities meet ADA requirements. And so that's actually a really fundamental piece that should be going literally ongoing and does take quite a bit of resources to implement. That'd be something that I would be really closely looking at. I also know that the Park District recently put in an All Abilities Park. And I think really partnering and trying to leverage relationships to be able to try to have more type of inclusivity with respect to disabilities would be really advantageous for us. The other two is looking more at our type of programming that we're providing. Because as we look at these DEI initiatives, inclusivity does include everyone. and people of all abilities and disabilities, right? So that's going to be an important piece of part of our initiative moving forward as we implement those type of goals.
All right, great. Thanks, Jen. If you want to hang out for just a second, I'm going to offer a last opportunity for people to submit some questions.
Sure.
And otherwise, we'll cut you loose a few minutes early.
Okay.
Questions going once.
Just have some music in the background or something.
Hope someone's working on a question.
All right.
All right, we've got a question that says, how do you envision your working relationship with the mayor?
You know, I envision that to be a really close working relationship. I think that, you know, to be running for office under a certain type of form of government and then having it change over takes some adjustment. And so my goal is really to work with the mayor to be able to try to find ways that work and redefine what her goal is in her new role that also complement what the entire council would like to achieve well. Usually mayors and city managers have to work really closely together. You know, the mayor represents the city and the mayor is out there and is the face of the city and also runs the city council meetings. So that just goes without saying. And I think if you don't have that relationship, things are going to be kind of like pushing a boulder uphill. And so I would do as much as I can to facilitate that. But again, keep in mind that what you do, how you treat your council, what you do for one, you do for all. You are working now in a council manager form of government. Everybody has access to the same information. Everybody has an equal vote. And so you have to make sure as a city manager that you're treating all of your council equally, but at the same time, recognizing the uniqueness of the mayoral position.
All right, thanks, Jen. All right, I think that question came in that we were looking for. Where do you stand on the facts proving that police do not actually enhance public safety, especially for marginalized peoples, and that public safety is better obtained through other services and response teams that don't show up with loaded weapons?
Wow. Well, I'll tell you one thing first before I answer that, is that ultimately, if there's going to be any kind of change in police funding or how the police operates, that's going to be something that's going to be at the direction of the council in terms of defunding the police, if that's what we're really getting at. So I'm not making that decision. So frankly, my opinion doesn't matter. It's the opinion of the council that matters because they're the ones that give me direction. That being said, I personally feel that, you know, the police should maintain funded, but I also believe that if there is a better way to provide services or to come and work alongside of the police, whether it's having behavioral health specialists, nonprofits, that they work in tandem. And if there are things that the police department does well, they should focus on that. And if there are things that they're doing not so well, and there's a partner that can do it with them, by all means, we should be working with those partners because ultimately there is no us versus them, it's we. And as a city employee, my goal is to serve this community in the way that this community wants to be served. So my direction is going to be listening to the community and ultimately following the direction of the council.
All right, great. Thanks, Jen. I'm going to give it another 30 seconds for any more questions, and then we'll give you a few minutes back in your day.
All right. Well, thank you.
All right, questions going once. Questions going twice. All right, then I will throw out one final question for you then. Is there anything that we haven't asked you yet that you would like to speak on?
Wow. You know, I think you actually did a really good job with all of the questions. The only thing that I would want to say in parting is You've got a very, very hospitable and welcoming organization. I've been here almost a week, and it's been wonderful to be able to see your community, to be able to experience it firsthand. And you have a good group of people here that really want to support and serve Beaverton. So you're very, very fortunate. And Matthew, I'd love to thank you for hosting. You're a great commentator, and thank you everyone for your time and for letting me be able to share a little bit about my experience and interest in Beaverton.
Well, Jen, it's certainly been a pleasure having you on board with us this week. We look forward to more conversations as the days come on. So with that, thank you so much for joining us tonight, and have a great evening.
All right, take care. Thank you, everyone.
Enjoy the rest of your stay.
All right, bye-bye.
So everyone, if you're just joining us, we just heard from our first finalist of the evening, Jen Haruyama. We would like to hear from you. A feedback survey is now live in the chat box. It's been live for about the last half hour or so, and will be available and open until like 9 a.m. tomorrow morning. So with that, we're going to take a short break, and we're going to be back with our next finalist, Eric Zimmerman, at 6:50. All right, so we'll see you back in a few minutes. All right, welcome back everyone from the break. Joining us now is our next finalist, Eric Zimmerman. Eric, are you up with us?
I'm here.
All right, good evening, Eric. Welcome to tonight's community forum. Please introduce yourself to the audience and share with them what about Beaverton resonates with you. Why Beaverton?
Okay, so Eric Zimmerman, I'm really happy to be here and appreciate everybody taking some time out of their evening. I know this is the second one. I am really excited for Beaverton and to be a part of the Beaverton team because I think, it's not often that we have a change in government and a change in our charter where we get to kind of create from a bit of a new canvas, if you will. And I think that being a part of this opportunity and helping Beaverton, get it right for what does city management mean for a community like Beaverton is really what piqued my interest the most. I grew up in Oregon in another suburb of the metro area and have known Beaverton a long time. And I worked adjacently before in the city of Tigard. And so both my familiarity, but also just an opportunity to introduce city management to this community is really attractive to me. And I can't wait to get started. So looking forward to the rest of tonight too.
All right, good deal. Well, like I was telling you earlier, and maybe even yesterday at our other panel, we got a lot of questions, and I see we got a handful of folks watching tonight. So at least we got some community involvement and people are interested. So the first question for you is: you'll be administering all policy for a city of almost 100,000 people. I think Beaverton's right on the cusp of 100,000. But you will not have been elected to represent any of them. How would you observe, solicit, and incorporate the needs and wishes of the voters?
Yeah, so it's a great question, and it's really important as we get used to this new form of government. And I think first and foremost, every city manager, you have to have that good relationship with that elected body. The city council and the mayor really are that conduit between the public, all of our residents in Beaverton, and myself as a city manager. And it's really, I approach it as a partnership. And my role here, I would approach it from a standpoint of trying to take the input that city council is getting and the ideas and the policies that they want to implement, and then find the best way to do that is transparent and good government, right? I'll be the city manager to a staff of a lot of folks who are experts in their field, and then when it comes to my office and our team, really trying to take that expertise that exists, blend it with the ideas and the policies that are coming from the elected body, and making that work in good government. It can be complicated. That's why I think it's good as a city manager to have a good understanding of both sides, city operations, but also public engagement, community engagement, the various neighborhoods. And that's really my approach. So I'm a pretty, a collaborative leader. I'm not a person who likes to be stuck to my desk. And so one of the ways, since part of the question is how will I do that, is really engaging in public engagement, community engagement with various groups. We've got neighborhood groups, we've got school groups, we've got different diversities and racial groups that are all represented in Beaverton, business groups that I think both I'll have a role with and city council. But it's really important that the community know that this doesn't change the fact that policy is set at the council level, and they still remain our main avenue to get change in the city when it comes to overall policies. And it's something that city managers really try to help them do in the best and most transparent way.
All right, right along those lines. So city council does set policy, but they're informed by the expertise of staff. If counselors are considering a policy choice that you consider unwise, how do you provide your best professional opinion and then work through any implications of that policy decision if it goes against your recommendation?
Sure, yeah. I think my approach really starts with just the relationship that I have with council. And that relationship hopefully doesn't start when we're in disagreement. It starts way before that, really upstream, so that when I bring a concern or when our staff brings a concern, that council knows it's based in facts, it's based in a logical approach, and that we've done our due diligence as staff to maybe identify a bump in the road or a hurdle that we need to at least discuss. That happens all the time because ideas come from the community, ideas funneled to the council, and then it's our job to put some details around those ideas. That's pretty normal work for us. And when it comes to disagreements, I think what I really approach a relationship between staff and city council is I like to see where we can give the city council options that achieve the same ends, but maybe different routes to get there. And in my experience, those options are really what keep us from being just in a conflict of this can't work or this has to work. I really want to avoid that question and give options so the council has some decisions. I think that's incumbent upon staff to develop those options because we're doing our own engagement, or if council tells us they hear something from a certain group in the community, that we go investigate it further so that we can really unpack that. And then, ultimately, if council takes an action that me as a city manager disagrees with, my job is to let them know my opinion. But then really when council takes an action and when we're moving forward, I really value and I'll have a united front with the council on those topics. And so I have a role both to give that professional advice, but also represent the city's position. And I think that's a really important distinguishing line that city managers, it can be at times tough, but it is part of our job. And I think we get pretty good at it.
All right, good deal. So we're going to switch gears just a little bit here, but so you're a local guy. You've been around, spent some time in Tigard and you went to college in the area. So you know that Beaverton has a reputation for being pretty family friendly. What would you do to continue to attract families to want to live in Beaverton?
That's great. And when I think about that, what I really think about is, if we have the best planners and community representatives, and we're talking about new development and making sure that neighborhoods are a placemaking endeavor, that neighborhoods are open to everybody in the community, that they have services. Those are the types of things I think keep healthy neighborhoods happening. When you've got neighborhoods that are mixed in their services, mixed in the type of housing, and mixed in who calls that home. That is the kind of neighborhood that I think our planners at the city professional staff level can really help with. And I think we have a role to do that. Beaverton is in a unique position that we have a very robust downtown, which not a lot of suburbs have. And I think that for those of us who've chosen to live in a larger metro area, Beaverton is a great option if you also want a little bit of a pullback from downtown Portland. You've got places like Beaverton to call home, and our neighborhoods speak for themselves out here, and they have for a really long time. And frankly, in my lifetime, Beaverton has made a clear and deliberate placemaking effort that there is no reason for a city manager to get in front of that. It's going quite well, I think, and I would want to keep that going by supporting that economic development staff, our community development staff, and making sure we're engaging with community members and not just developers. Those are the things that make a really healthy neighborhood.
Great, thanks. And one of the fundamental aspects of being a family-friendly community is safety. So where does community safety rank in your list of priorities?
So I think, community safety has to be very high on a priority. I think if you haven't got safety within your community, there's a lot of other things that are going to follow the side, and we certainly won't be a place that families feel are a good place to be in. They'll pick other neighborhoods. But I think if this question is being asked, there's probably some root to that, and we're recognizing what is happening across our state, across the nation right now when it comes to what does community safety mean, and what do we want out of our cities when it comes to providing that community safety. That's going to be a big conversation. It's going to be a conversation that has to work, I think, very deliberately to bring in voices who haven't traditionally been at the table when we're talking about what does it mean for you to have a safe community. And I think what we're going to learn is that we have some models previously that aren't working for everybody, and that if we come with an open mind, come with an open heart on that community safety can evolve and still be achieved. I'm coming to that with that approach from an open standpoint, and I hope that my example will also bring other people to the table, because I think that's a continually evolving and really important conversation, particularly in our current era, that I hope a lot of people will lean in on.
All right, thanks. And another important aspect of safety is the law enforcement piece. And so the next question is, the Beaverton Human Rights Advisory Commission has spent much of the last year working with Beaverton Police Department to understand what is possible and achievable to improve police interactions with people they encounter in Beaverton. What is your experience with public safety policy development, and how would you facilitate establishing a public oversight commission?
Okay, I at the previous three small governments that I've worked at, I've had a good relationship with that local law enforcement agency. I've been involved in crafting and designing programs that brought a law enforcement program along with other social service outreach programs together to address some really difficult issues around homelessness and our population is living on the street. And I think I have a good track record of finding a way to weave that in. When it comes to how will I go about it in the future, I think, again, I'll go back to, it starts with good relationships and good trust early in our relationship, and that is what gets all of us to the table. I think there are a lot of people in every corner who want to approach this topic in a meaningful way with respectful discussions that actually get to some sort of accountability that is going to work for a lot of people. I don't think that it's my call as a city manager to dictate, an oversight committee. That is certainly a policy debate that needs to happen at the city council. If they undertake that debate, I think our staff, what we'll do is we'll advise on that. We're going to look around the state, look around the nation at models that have worked, models that have hit some walls, and bring the city council options and convene community events, community input, town halls, whatever it is that the city council needs to make a very thoughtful conversation. I don't think we're the only community making that, or at least leaning in the direction of having that kind of conversation. And staff is really here to support that, and we have to lean in on it. So that would be my approach to it, and I think it'd be an effort well spent.
Okay. You just said a key part of what you were talking about in building relationships and having trust. So that's kind of all aspect, that's outward. But let's look inward for a second within the city. And how would you cultivate a healthy working relationship between you, the mayor, the staff, all under the new city charter?
Okay, give me there. I'm sorry.
Let's try that one again. How would you cultivate a healthy working relationship between you, the mayor, city staff, and city staff under the new city charter?
Yeah, so I told the city council this, and I've had a great opportunity so far to speak with union leadership from the different unions, the different employee groups, the department directors, and the city council. I really value a one-on-one relationship with the city council, so that before each week and before council meetings, that they're very informed with what is coming down with respect to city business, council business. I also think it's a good way for us to talk just about what is happening in the city, and also for me to gauge what's really important to them and make sure that our staff is working on projects and providing the right information that can actually help the council round out their decision-making process. For some counselors, that is more research. For other counselors, it's community engagement or helping facilitate. For some counselors, they want to meet more individually with staff so they can really get into the details of something that's coming down that's really near and dear to their heart. I think our role is to facilitate that, and I think that it's actually well worth our time and effort, because it pays off then when things finally come in front of council. So city managers play a really important role, I think, when it comes to the conduit between staff and our elected body. And one of the things that I really like about city management is that I know we have experts on staff who didn't get into maybe their field of work to be making public meetings and going to to council. That really causes sometimes a little bit of anxiety, because they're planners, they're engineers, they want to be they got here because they're part of the street crew or the police officers. That conduit really should rest with me and a few other people in our organization to help make their work makes sense to council, and council's priorities make sense in their work. And that's really where I see my role in communicating those relationships and helping translate sometimes. I think that's a big role for a city manager.
All right, thank you. And a fundamental aspect of these working relationships you're talking about is unity. So I guess what would you do to promote unity among any divisive voices that are out in the community?
I think my first approach, really, wherever I've been and whatever the issue is I'm a very approachable person. I want to listen through those concerns, or listen through areas that either a group or an individual is bringing to my attention, or is feeling that maybe they haven't been heard in other areas of our community or our organization. A city manager can sometimes be that good sounding board. It's helpful for me to really get that personal touch, because then I can see where some of the root of that, if it's a lack of unity, if that's what you're talking about, that helps me. It helps me kind of see the issue on a personal level. And then I really think that if we're all approaching that issue from an open, dialogue focused, solutions focused, and meaningful versus argumentative, that we usually can find some common ground. And common ground on the types of issues that bring a city together or apart is where we make our money, because that, of 100,000 people, we're going to have disagreements, and we're going to argue over the right direction, the wrong direction. And oftentimes in cities and in communities, it's a bit of a compromise. But at the same time, there's going to be times when folks are going to be disappointed with the answer that comes either from me or from the council's action. And I think a role that I've got is also to put some sense making around those disappointing moments, because there are some things that maybe compromise isn't the best way forward, or regardless of the way forward, there are going to be some parties who are going to be, upset about that. If I can treat a person with some empathy, if I can explain to them the reasoning, I think that's at least a gesture of respect and some trust. And hopefully the next time or on the next issue, that trust still is there, even though we didn't agree the last time.
All right, that kind of brings me to my next question is, describe your experience with equity in the workplace.
So I had the very fortunate chance, if you will, in one of my first jobs of getting to join some employee resource groups that the county that I worked at were under the equity and inclusion office, and working with the veterans group there for all of us who are employees who are veterans, or also for the LGBT group for all of us who were part of that group. It gave me such a meaningful interaction with other wings of the organization that from those very first days, I've really always valued that kind of approach in an organization. I was really happy with the work that we did when I was at the City of Tigard, where the diversity and equity team really lifted off. And I think from the folks that I've talked to there, it's still kicking, and it's something that is still really part of the fabric of that organization. And that's something to be proud of, because what I learned is, as a city manager, as one of the senior leaders, when you show yourself to be a person who talks the talk, walks the walk when it comes to diversity and equity, there are a lot of ideas, or there are a lot of experiences that would be good for you to understand that your employees have gone through, that are bubbling, but just right under the surface, and they're not quite sure if it's yet a safe environment to bring those up, or the willingness to talk about it. But when you lean in as a senior person in the organization, all of a sudden there's a cascading effect of people who are really interested in this topic, who want this work to matter, and who recognize it's important in the workplace. And I think that we have in local government, we have a bunch of employees who are very interested, very committed in some places to diversity and equity work. At the same time, we're an organization who structurally thinks we have to follow certain laws or certain policies, and we have to reflect on how those laws and policies can affect different people in different ways. And that is a continual learning event. So I like to bring, lunch and learns in I want to examine hiring practices, HR practices, examine our retention for our folks, particularly those are people of color and different gender minorities, sexual minorities, and make sure that we're not letting people go because we did the wrong thing. That I want to make sure that people know Beaverton is open for business, but also because that means we serve our communities that much better because they're represented in our workforce. It's really important to me.
So I guess if I were to summarize what you just said, lean into equity is essentially what you were telling me, which makes, leads to my next question is how will you ensure an equity lens is used in departmental work and with, budgeting for equity?
Yeah, so I think there is some work that has happened here well before my time. And one thing is the chief equity officer for the city. I've already seen it's been budgeted. I think that's exciting. It is a very good step and a good nod in the right direction. So I'm excited to bring that person on, within the first year of being here. I think that applying that equity lens, when you can ensure that we have a shared set of values relative to an equity lens across the city departments, what I've learned over the years is that your employees then start to ensure that we're using an equity lens even when you're not around, when the council's not around, when the manager's not around, because it's built into the culture. That's what I want to see. I've seen that at other organizations I've been a part of. I got to learn from that type of system. And I think there are a lot of ways that we can signal our commitment to that in how we structure ourselves, how we budget, how we look at when employees participate in this type of activity. Do we consider it extra time or do we consider it part of their job? And that's where I think you send those financial signals that this is part of the work that we do and that it is okay to lean into this topic from a work standpoint and not just an extras standpoint. So the equity lens for me, I think that it is when you apply it right, it takes years to build culture, right? But you have to start and you have to talk about it. And it is such a great tool in policymaking. I find it's such a great tool in policymaking to give another check and another nod. And I think that it is one of the best ways where the community can let you know you're running afoul or that you haven't quite applied that equity lens the right way. So it's a really good tool because if the community knows that it's one of your parameters and it's one of your approaches, then they can help you say, but you didn't really engage with us on this topic through that lens, and here's how it's affecting us. It's a really great check.
All right, thanks, Eric. And that kind of brings me to my next question, which viewing stuff through an equity lens, it can be applied pretty much anywhere. But my next question is regarding climate. So what experience do you have with climate crisis policy, and how would you execute on Beaverton's climate plan?
Yeah, I think my experience really runs from a couple of angles. Before being at the city of Tigard, I was more in the political staff at a county where helping that county commission pass some climate action plans, look at the types of purchasing that we're doing to make sure it's aligned with our climate action plan, taking some positions on other industry that was coming into the community. Those are the types of things that where my experience was on the public policy side. I think from a city manager side, my role really goes to, okay, let's see what are those initiatives that we're interested in. What are the things within city business? And we have to think about cities are huge engines of economic activity. And so we can drive some markets when it comes to what the city is buying, right? I think I've heard that the city has a goal in terms of its vehicle fleet transitioning, over the next 8 years into, electric fleets and stuff like that. That's where cities get to affect change. How we develop buildings, how we look at what kind of LEED certifications. There will always be a pushback about you can do that for less if you just give up this. And I think what it's important for me as a city manager to do is paint the picture in terms of how in the long term achieving climate initiatives, sustainability as a way of business for us inspires our neighbor businesses and neighbor communities to do the same thing, and that we are an influencer and that we have to walk our walk in that. So I really think city management has to show the long game matters on this, and that's the role I'll take.
Okay, so you mentioned the long game, then there's also the short game we have with having an interim city manager for the last several months. Are you familiar with the interim city manager's work thus far? And are you comfortable with the way the city is now organized for managing the city government?
Yeah, in fact, Kurt and I had a conversation yesterday, so I've gotten his perspective kind of over the last few months, how things have gone. And one of the things we talked about are the things that he's noticed that if he was here for a longer time that he would address, but for the sake of maybe not having a change for a few months and then having another change once a permanent city manager came in, he really took the tact of highlighting it for me and probably for the other candidate instead of just making initial changes and going. I think one of the biggest things I've heard is, role definition with the new form of government. I think I've heard a lot about a difference in what it's like to work for the city of Beaverton based on which department you're a part of. And so those are some of the things that have kind of bubbled up and that I think a city manager is going to have to spend some time on. And I certainly don't envy anybody to come in on day one of a new form of government, try to make some sense out of everything, and also do it in the midst of a pandemic and not being right here. I mean, that to me, that's quite challenging, but he gave me some good advice, and I've gotten a whole lot of advice from other folks over the last couple of weeks here.
All right. Well, speaking of challenges, that of course brings me to my next question is, from what you've seen so far, what would you say Beaverton's biggest challenges are, and how would you begin to address them? Obviously, that's, addressing them in full is more time than we have tonight, but how would you begin to address Beaverton's biggest challenges?
Sure. This goes twofold, right? So I obviously, as a leader within a community, I'm going to have an eye to our internal stuff as a workforce, but also to the larger community. So Beaverton, being where we're at, I think that, one of our challenges just regionally, of course, is our ongoing issues of traffic congestion. How do we move people around? What is it going to look like when we come out of the work from home only model as we transition back into whatever the new normal is? I don't think that's unique to Beaverton, but I think we are going to have to be at the table, a partner for all of our small businesses who are trying to find a way to access funds that are available to keep them afloat. The city is in a position where financially we're going to benefit from some of these recovery dollars, but it's really important that we don't, forget about being a conduit, being an assistance to the neighborhood businesses, to the people who don't traditionally, fill out government forms, right? That is something that can be a real barrier based on your experience. We have a role in that. And I think for my short-term biggest challenge, what new normal looks like in our community is something that isn't just Beaverton, but it's a regional discussion. And I think that we can put some efforts toward that. There's an important conversation happening right now in Beaverton relative to school resource officers. And our council is having that conversation. Our human rights commission has had that conversation. The school board is having that conversation. And wherever that goes, right, it's going to be either a meaningful discussion that maybe tweaks a program or it could significantly change it. And I think that that's important for us as a community and the city in particular to be keenly aware of. It's something our counselors are dealing with quite a lot. From an internal standpoint, I think there's some, leveling of what it's like to work based on which departments you're in the city. It can be a little bit more fair across the board. And so that direction from the city manager's office is clear and not interpreted in 17 or 1,700 different ways based on where and which team you work on. So I really have heard that this week, particularly from our employees. I think that's important because that affects how we interact with our public. Because if our public interacts with different departments at different times and they get a different sense of values and different sense of what normal is for us, that's probably not the marketing strategy that really brands us as a united front as the city of Beaverton. So that's something I want to spend some time on as well. I think I'll stop there because I kind of tell you're getting a little nervous on time there, but yeah, those are some of the areas I'm thinking right now.
Well, that's, you'd mentioned how we interact with the public, and and a really important touch point with the public is our municipal court. Now we're kind of a little bit unique in that sense because a lot of cities don't have courts, but we do. So can you please tell us what your experience with municipal court operations and how you feel the role of the city manager plays into said court operations?
Yeah, being 100% transparent, it's not an area that I have a ton of experience with. At the city of Tigard, I had a couple of really great managers and administrators between me and the court, but it did fall within my portfolio. And I really think when I think about municipal court, it's really important to me that our system has meaningful and widespread access for different people and how they engage. Municipal court, in my view, is a way for us to defer our residents away from the more traditional criminal justice system. And I think it really works for the community in that sense, or at least it should work in that sense. My experience in the past has really been, there have been other programs maybe that we're going to increase the capacity or the need for capacity in the court. And instead of going live with those programs, making sure that we actually have the capacity to deal with an influx of new people having to appear in front of the court. So I think being able to recognize where it's time to pause one city operation that is going to affect the court so that the court has time to grow or at least plan around that growth, I'm pretty proud of, and I think that that's important. I think that how we go forward using our municipal court, there are opportunities within some of our other marginalized communities that could help us in the diversion fight, right? To keep folks out of the traditional criminal justice system that I think are really unique opportunities, or at least something I'm interested in exploring. I want to talk more with the presiding judge about it. I did yesterday a little bit, but I told her, I said, I need more help on this because it looks like there is a lot of opportunity in proportionality, better access to justice, diversion for things that folks are suffering through rather than crimes they're committing. And I think it's important that we distinguish that, and muni courts are in a good position to do that going forward, I think.
All right, great, thank you. I'm approaching the end of my submitted list, and now we're going to hopefully here transition pretty soon to some live questions that recently came in. But before we get to those, I think everyone's wanting to know, if you become the city manager of Beaverton, will you live in Beaverton?
All right, so that's the second time I've been asked that question this week, and I'll say the same thing I did yesterday with the employees. While I'm very open to it, and I live just on the Tigard border, Tigard, Beaverton, and Portland border over there, I don't know if you've looked at the market, but I don't think that's happening in the next year because it's just a little crazy out there right now. But I understand the reason for the question. I'm very close to the community. I'm 10 minutes away from City Hall as it is, but I am in the city of Portland.
All right, fair enough. All right, so we'll transition to the live Q&A now. The first question I've got says, right now the two biggest tech employers ride for free, refusing to be part of the city or paying taxes to support the infrastructure they use. What would you do as a city manager to prevent additional tech companies from seeing that as precedent? Do you believe making an area attractive to employers includes throwing tax breaks at them?
I think that it's obviously one of the tools that exists in the things that we can do to attract employers. The question is if it is good government, and that's what I've talked about earlier in terms of, I think my role as a city manager is to show some of that cost benefit analysis, to have our economic development team really talk us through that and what it means. I think also I think the question is really keen to talk about precedent and what that looks like in the future. But it's not the city manager's role here to make a policy decision on this. This is something that I think our job is to round out that decision-making process for the council and for the mayor to debate on the dais and in a very public way, because that's really a role here. It's a policy decision to make some tax deals or breaks in for employers. And this is something where I think cities cities look at this all the time. Like I said, it is one of the tools. It's the extent from which or to which the cities employ that tool that sometimes the public can become uncomfortable with. And so we bring out the numbers, we talk through the implications, and that's our role as staff. And so that's something I would do in the future if we were faced with more of those discussions.
All right. Thanks, Eric. Now, just a moment ago, you mentioned kind of leaning heavily on the economic development team to kind of get a good understanding of everything. What is your experience with downtown economic development, especially regarding emerging downtown districts?
Mm-hmm. One of the things I really like about Beaverton is just that it's finally not a one-person show. I think economic development is one of those areas in city business that can have a real impact, but oftentimes is a really small team to implement it. And in Beaverton, I've learned that there are more than just one person helping make that work. I think it's really great. I had the opportunity in the city of Medford to our director of the urban renewal district and that downtown core, he was bringing us ideas that really helped talk about revitalizing the downtown that had the city over decades had moved away from, and looking at how to bring that back in. I think I learned something every day from economic development professionals. They are really keen at bringing housing and bringing retail and bringing commercial businesses into the same districts, and how you strike that balance. So I learned a lot down there in Medford doing that. And then, Tigard has a good example of their Main Street revitalization, and their economic development director over there is somebody who, what I like about that profession is they're always willing to take a city manager on a walk and show them what it is they're actually talking about. And so my role and how I've tried to help them is, okay, and what are the actions you need by a city council to make that possible? Or who do we need to convene to get that development or that revitalization happening? And that's really where I have that role.
Okay, thank you. Now, the next question that just came in was, you continually refer to Beaverton as a suburb of Portland, although part of the metro area, especially in terms of transit and, it's bouncing around on me, hang on. Where'd it go? All right, here we go. Sorry about that. You continually refer to Beaverton as a suburb of Portland, although part of the metro area, especially in terms of transit and some other services. Many in Beaverton see this as this city is very separate from Portland, do not want to be a part of that city, and avoid going there. How will you address Beaverton's need to be independent of and not viewed as part of Portland? And in that philosophy, is that a philosophy that you could embrace and enhance?
Yeah, so that's a great question, and it's why I pointed out earlier that Beaverton having such a robust downtown in and of itself is a great opportunity. In fact, one of the groups I met with earlier, it's like that was a real gem that I think about Beaverton. But in the community that we live in, when there are public policy debates that are happening in our neighboring cities, it is very often that it trickles its way into the cities surrounding that area. And I think that's also true here. The point that I'm making is that you're right, I 100% agree that you don't have to leave any one of our suburbs. Frankly, I think the suburbs in this area have done a good job of being able to have the services you need right here. That wasn't the point I was making, but the point I'm making is that sometimes what works in Portland, there are going to be groups who want it to be exactly the same here, and vice versa, absolutely not the same. I think it's our job to do some kind of examining what actually makes sense in Beaverton, for Beaverton, within Beaverton's community. So I think that's the point I'm trying to make. It's certainly a philosophy I can embrace. I don't think that you can spend a lot of time in Beaverton and not recognize just how robust of a community that it is, from dense neighborhoods to more, to kind of the sprawling neighborhoods to very rural, and then a revitalized downtown. Absolutely. But I'm cognizant of that there will be interest groups, community groups who will be emailing me about stuff that they're seeing happen in our neighboring cities, and they'll be emailing your city council about things that are happening in neighboring cities, that we're going to have to put some parameters around what do we think about that and what does that look like here. So that's why I bring that up.
All right, thanks, Eric. And it's looking like we've just about reached the end of our time, but I'm going to use my authority as the moderator to extend for just a couple more minutes because there's two questions I really want to hear about.
Okay.
The first one is, you've said that Beaverton is family friendly and has a robust downtown, yet many people are being left behind and are either houseless or at risk of being houseless. What will the city manager's role be in Beaverton in making Beaverton a more inclusive city that emphasizes services to everyone?
So incredibly important question. And it's an area that I think it gets to the heart of why I think Beaverton has always been a regional leader and is, I think, the most influential city in Washington County, and why it has to continue to be. And the city manager role here, when I was at Tigard, it was always interesting because city managers all get together, the assistant city managers, which is what my role was, we all get together and we would talk from the Washington County cities. And Beaverton would be at the table, but it was just different in the last form of government. And so sometimes the things we were talking about in solutions, we'd have to, it was time, they had to check in, we weren't sure, because really it was more of a political leadership at that point on some of the operational stuff. So I think there's an opportunity for us to bring some development solutions, some housing and shelter solutions, which I know already Beaverton is moving forward on. I just saw today some proposals for additional affordable housing in some of our new tracts of land. That's where a city manager can really, I think, push the planning staff and push our economic development staff to look at how you incorporate what I call mixed communities, mixed income communities. At the same time, when we talk about any of the programs, earlier I talked about COVID relief and helping dollars get into the hands of local businesses, local families. What I'm really talking about in that sense are those groups who don't have experience interacting with federal government, who don't have a bank to go to for a bunch of new capital. And I think what I heard today is that 63% of the funds that went out from our economic development team and from the city of Beaverton, because the money that was put forward went to minority owned businesses in the city of Beaverton to help them get through the pandemic and rent. That's a really deliberate effort that I think is important for a city manager to keep looking at more opportunities for that. The other piece that I think is really important for a city manager when it comes to making sure that folks are not left behind is that when we talk about our equity lens, that is the work we're talking about. We're talking about how does this affect our most vulnerable population? How do we engage with the county to ensure that the social services that happen in Beaverton are reaching the right populations? How can we be a convener of that? Because we're not the social services agency, but we certainly know the population. There are residents, there are neighbors, and our relationship and how good it is with Washington County will help that get to the folks who need our help. That's a really important role. It's one of the reasons that I got into city management work, was because I thought my role previously in the county could help that type of work hit on the ground. And then I think that we continue to look at the housing dollars from Metro and make sure that we're getting the best bang for our buck to get the most affordable housing developed and get people in that housing, and couple it with a shelter model so that we have a progression of street shelter and affordable housing. And there's no perfect solution, but I think we're already leaning in the right direction about it. And I hope that if the community has more input, that they know that I'm a willing participant, and that's a table I hope that I'm invited to, and because I'm certainly going to be inviting folks to help me make some decisions on that.
All right, thanks, Eric. And what you just said really ties into my next question and my final question. The question is, you had mentioned ensuring that voices that are not traditionally at the table are there for those difficult conversations. I want to hear why you believe that those voices are not there, and understand your strategy for going about ensuring equity and voice.
Sure. I had an interesting experience this last year. For some folks may know, I was deployed over in Kosovo with the Army, and I wear another hat where I'm a major in the National Guard here in Oregon. When I was in Kosovo this last year, and we went through the Department of Defense mandated some racial equity training, and I ended up I was a facilitator and trainer for the U.S. forces that we had over there in Kosovo. I was struck, frankly, by the either unwillingness to at least acknowledge that there are discrepancies, that there are inequities, and then also really proud of seeing members within the ranks that I was, facilitating, who are willing to speak up and talk about their own experiences. And what I really learned in that is that there are just circles that we run in, that a lot of us run in. There are structures that we have benefited from, that many of us have benefited from. And without a really deep internal look and a reflective look, you can be wearing blinders on that topic. And you can certainly feel like you are empathetic until you really hear truly some of the impacts that are happening. And so I think I'm well aware that there are a lot of folks who don't acknowledge that problems can exist and do exist, that structures have been set up in a way that are not inclusive always, and that is an ongoing and endeavor for us. So that experience kind of guides when I say I feel confident to know that not all voices are always at the table. Granted, I haven't been at the Beaverton table yet, but I've been at enough in a lot of places to know that there's probably a seat that could be filled by another voice or another perspective. And if you're doing meaningful and dedicated work, I'm not threatened by, and I think none of us should be, by having another voice there to help us round out that work. So that's really the approach I take. I got to meet with the internal equity team of the City of Beaverton. I've watched some of the Human Rights Commission videos from their last meeting. So I know a lot of work is happening, and there are people at the table, and I see people who maybe disagree on stuff who are at the table. So it's happening in some veins, and that's great. My job is to make sure it's happening across the board in the city's community engagement and our operations.
All right. Well, fantastic. And Eric, I want to thank you so much for spending the last several minutes with us and hanging on a few extra as well. I really hope you enjoy the rest of your time with Beaverton going through this process. I think you've got a tour coming up tomorrow, so please enjoy that before you meet with council. And with that, have a great night, okay?
Thanks, everybody, for coming. Appreciate everyone's
All right, thanks.
time.
Take care.
Bye.
Well, folks, we heard from two exceptional candidates for the city manager position. Our elected officials are hoping for lots of feedback from tonight's viewers. So if you haven't already opened up that survey in the chat box, please use this opportunity to do so now. The survey will again remain open until 9 a.m. tomorrow Pacific time. And you can also find a link to the survey on the city's website at www.beavertonoregon.gov/citymanager until it closes at 9 a.m. tomorrow. Our city council intends to make an appointment in the coming weeks, so please stay tuned for an announcement. From all of us here at the City of Beaverton City Manager Search Team, thank you for watching and participating in this important event. Have a great evening, and remember to complete that survey. Good night.